Securities and Exchange Commission is asking the oil and gas companies to provide it with detailed information, including chemicals used and efforts to minimize environmental impact, about their use of a controversial drilling process used to crack open natural gas trapped in rocks. You've heard a lot about it recently. It's called fracking. My guest is renowned environmental lawyer and host of Speaking of Justice, Jan Schlichtmann. Jan, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Scott. This is a really important issue, and I'm glad we're following this latest development.
I am too, Jan. Let's talk about why the SEC is getting involved, because this was really all about money and investors, right?
Yes, there's been an explosion in this this field, this industry that's grown up literally overnight, which has been extracting gas from the fracturing of underground rock. And literally this industry has blown into a multi-billion-dollar industry over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, gas obtained from this process, highly controversial process, amounted to only 2% of the amount of natural gas used by the country. Now it's over 35% and growing rapidly. And of course, New York is the big coveted prize in this gas gold rush. So this is a major significant development because the SEC is alarmed at the amount of money being poured into this gas gold rush, and the lack of solid information and a lot of reasons to believe that in fact this industry may be built on financial sand.
Okay. And at issue here is whether or not this affects things like drinking water. Now, fracking in general, as it becomes more common and popular, as it is, it's really regulated on a state-by-state basis. It's exempt from federal statutes like the Safe Water Drinking Act or Drinking Water Act. There's an EPA study coming out soon. How does all this apply right now?
Well, definitely the federal oversight has been curtailed. That's one of the controversial things that has occurred over the last decade that happened, about half a dozen years ago, exempting them from many of the, but not all, statutes, really limiting the ability of the EPA to supervise this booming and controversial industry. The states also, have very limited powers available to them to be able to regulate this industry as well. And they are, like I say, we're now talking about gas wells that are in the hundreds of thousands. They, grew up in the West, Texas being a major producer, the far West, and then coming into Pennsylvania. And now, like I say, the industry has got its covetous eyes on the state of New York. So there's a great need for regulation. A whole trail of tears has been left by this industry in communities around the country: pollution of water supplies, destruction of the environment, and use of these so-called safe methods that turn out to produce millions and millions of gallons of contaminated water laced with hundreds of chemicals, many of them not disclosed by the industry, but some of them known to be carcinogens, leaving not just lagoons filled of this chemical waste at the various well sites, but they also have all of this so-called frack fluid from the breaking up of the rocks, and then the extraction of this fluid comes back, and they then have to dispose of it. And a lot of this disposal gets done in our rivers and streams and lakes, either through the normal channels, in which there's not a sufficient testing being done of this highly dangerous and toxic fluid, or not, being midnight dumped in quantities, and lots of reports of that. So we've got a very troubled industry that has really sprung upon the national landscape only in the last few years.
And the SEC here, again, getting involved because now, this has become so common and it looks like it's so lucrative. There's a lot of investors involved, and the SEC, like it did in the past and did so well with credit default swaps and subprime mortgages, is trying to protect investors to make sure that this kind of technology is really sound and safe.
Well, yes, and what happened, and it's a very unusual development, what's been happening is that over the last few years, the EPA, the regulators, state and federal, and citizens groups have put as much pressure as they can on the industry to disclose their use of these chemicals and their environmental practices, and not very successfully. And the New York Times this past year has done a tremendous series called the Drilling Down series, which people can access on the internet, and I certainly urge them to do so. It's a absolute wealth of information and a insight into this, the dark side of this industry. One of the things that the New York Times did, and quite comprehensively, is they went through these tens of thousands of emails and memos and documents of insiders and market analysts, and they saw a whole pattern of these industry insiders talking about the fact that in some instances that a scam is being done on the public and on investors in touting the profitability and the amount and availability and the lack of problems associated with the extraction of this gas, when in fact it turns out the industry and the insiders know that it's just not true. And a lot of money has been pouring into this industry based on these assertions. And because of that New York Times series, which was done, like I say, quite brilliantly, New York State has conducted an investigation, and that has spurred the federal government in the form of the SEC to do the same. And now the SEC is now adding the voice, the demand for the industry to fully disclose the chemicals that they use and the actual practices that they engage in, and what are the environmental problems, the legacy that's going to be left, these various communities that they are entering. And are, in fact, these claims about the profitability and the lack of problems true? Or is this money really being invested in something that is going to be not only an environmental nightmare, but a financial one as well?
And I guess finally, in closing, the companies have resisted so far because they think this kind of information is material to a company in that it could affect a company's overall worth or value.
Well, the industry has been fighting, as it has historically, full disclosure, the facts necessary for there to be an informed public discussion. And this has really been haunting the industry and will continue to haunt the industry. They've been very successful at the federal level in particular, like I say, over the last half dozen years, in getting special exemptions from various statutes, limiting the ability of state and federal regulators to know what exactly they're doing and what chemicals they're using. And this is now another voice, another way for another pressure on the industry to actually come clean with what, in fact, how are they going about their work, what are the dangers, and what are the problems, and what will be the environmental legacy here, and how profitable are these wells really going to be, and does it justify the environmental cost, and will it justify the amount of money being invested in the kind of returns being promised? So this is a very pivotal year for the industry, for the market, and for the public, who has to lose, stands to lose drinking water supplies available to tens of millions of people, and losing them for the foreseeable future if we get this wrong. So we're really watching this closely. I expect we'll be doing lots of programs on this, a lot of late-breaking news that's going to be occurring over the next several months that's going to really dictate what is going to be the future of this industry and the environmental communities that this fracking really threatens.
All right, good stuff, Jan. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This has been Speaking of Justice, an affiliate of the Legal Broadcast Network.